Welcome back to another week's tutorial. So in last week's tutorial we zoomed in on the player character and made it so that the camera can follow the player around. We also witnessed the creation of a new bug, which I am putting off like a pro, procrastinating, not touching it, just leaving it there to like boil in its bugginess. In any case, so in this week's tutorial, we are going to do something similar to tutorial 9, where we implemented the sprites for the player character, except in this case, we are going to implement the sprites for the projectile. Now, if you go over to https://github.com wolfman13 HaxeFlixel tutorial, and you click on this little banner over here and scroll all the way down to tutorial 11, you will be able to come and get the images for the projectiles. So you can go over to assets, images, and here you can find the firebolt, ice bolt, poison bolt, and shock bolt. Now, I showed you last time how to get the images. So I'm just quickly going to download these guys, move them into the assets directory, restart the editor so that we have code completion, and then I'll be back. See you then. Okay, cool. So I added the new assets to the assets folder, and I regenerated the cache for Hax, so we should be able to now have the ability to get code completion for our assets, and that's it. So now let's head on over to projectile.hx. This is the projectile class, as you should know by now. So we can just scroll up to the top. So now this is a lot similar to the way we did this with the player class. So we can just remove the graphic and then say load graphic. We specifically want assets. Asset paths dot. So this is firebolt.png. It is animated, and this is also a 16 by 16 pixel images. Cool. Now we can just copy this, paste, Control V, Control V. Cool. Now it's no longer firebolt, it should now be ice and poison, and then finally shock. Now these images are set up in such a way that it's practically just the color combinations that change per projectile. So we can load all 4 projectiles depending on which type of projectile it is, and then just set up the animations for all of them like in a group rather than individually, because in the end it's still the same animation. So we can say animation.add moving, and it's frame 0 and 1, so it'll just flicker between 2 frames the whole time as it moves, and it's 2 frames, and it is an loop, so we say true. Now another animation add explosion. It is only frame number 2, it's 1 frame, and it is not looped, so you just say false. Now, after we generated so when we create a new instance of the projectile class, we want to start the animation for just the normal movement. So we can say animation.play, if I can type today. So, and which animation? We want the animation called moving. Awesomeness. Now, before we close down this project, there is one last thing we want to add. Now, what we could do is we could override the function called kill, which gets called when the projectile gets deleted or on impact. But we can also just say, we call this a public function, and then it just explodes, since that's pretty much what the projectile will do. It is of type void, so we don't really have to say anything over there. And then we just say animation.play explosion. Awesomeness. Just check that it's the same name. Explosion. Awesome. Now we will call this function when on impact, so that the explode animation gets called just before the instance of the projectile gets deleted. Cool. Okay, so now whilst we are on the same page of projectiles, I also want to go and head over to the player class, so we can just close projectile and then head over to player class. Now I want to add a function called fire, and this function will be public function. It will be called fire, and it doesn't take any parameters. And the way this will work is we call this function whenever we click the shoot button on the mouse. So this will then play the fire animation for the player, so that it actually looks like it's shooting out a fireball. So we can just copy the switch statement, and then instead of resting, we say attack. Attack. Spelled correctly, C first, K second. Cool. Now we can just paste that in, and that should be about it for the player class. Now on to play state to implement the new animations and to test this out. Okay, so now to do that, we can close down player, we can open play state. So let's just scroll down to the shoot function. So when the projectile gets created and added to the group of projectiles, we want to say player dot fire. Like, I literally just created a function, already forgot the name. That is how sleepy I am this morning. It's ridiculous. Okay, so now every time we press the fire button, the player animation will play for shoot for 1 frame, and then it'll go back to normal. Now we want to go and check every time there is some like projectile kill. We want to go projectile dot explode. Cool. So is there another one? Yeah, there is. Projectile dot explode. And then finally projectile dot explode. And that should be it. Let's test this out. Now I also made so there is no monsters on here at the end of the previous video. Well, after the end of recording, just so it goes back to more or less how it was before we tested it out. Now you can see we still have the ability to move around like we normally did. Now if we fire, you can see that the projectile now isn't just the normal like blob that it was. It is actually a different type of blob. Awesomeness. And we can move around. Now this might be a bit easier to see if we just move the projectile speed down a bit. So we can go over to movement speed of like, let's say 2. So recompile. As usual, the small cut here whilst it compiles. See in a minute. Okay, compilation is just about completed. Now if we shoot it, you can see that the animation played, it switched between the frames, and then it ended up dying, but for some reason it didn't play the explosion. The explosion frame. Now the reason it doesn't play the explosion animation, it could either be because the projectile gets destroyed before the animation can be played, or the animation can play like instantaneously and we don't even see it. either way, that is going to be part of the bug fixing we do in the next video. So you can almost see this as a type of homework that you can play around with. You have a week to try and solve it. And then next week we can compare notes to see how you did it compared to how I did it. So just before you leave and like close down this video and everything, as per usual, please feel free to drop a like, subscribe, or maybe even drop a dislike if you found my stuttering in this video extremely annoying like I did. And just before you go, if you ever want some nice developer swag, feel free to head on over to 8bitswag.com. Link should be in the description. We have shirts, hoodies, and stickers with more coming soon. So feel free to come and visit us. Now, I hope you have an awesome week, and I'll see you next time. Enjoy, and goodbye.